All right, what is up everybody? So in today's video, I'm gonna be eating my words just a little bit. And right off the bat, I have to admit to all of you that I was absolutely wrong about this 12-year bourbon from 1792. I first reviewed this back in May of 2021. And at the time I had a sample that I was working with, so I didn't have my own bottle. I wasn't able to sit down and really explore this thing. But in that video, I really enjoyed the nose. The palate fell a little bit flat. And at the end, you know, when I was kind of giving my overall thoughts, I just wasn't the biggest fan of this bourbon. And I wanted to kind of, before I re-review this thing, which is what this video is gonna be, I kind of wanted to talk about that very quickly. So if you think back, you know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were seeing so much sourced, highly aged bourbon, and much of that was, you know, assumed to be coming from Barton. I'm talking about your Sam Houstons, your Calumet Farms, your Augusta Buckners, maybe some of the older Blue Run stuff. A lot of things at that time were coming out between that like 12 to 15-year-old age range. A lot of it was way overpriced, or at least being gouged, and it was easy to make fun of. But at the end of the day, I really like aged Barton bourbon. So the complaints from me were really just about the pricing and not about the quality of the whiskey, because I enjoyed the heck out of some Sam Houston back in those days, and even today. The reason I'm saying all of this is because I think when I was tasting this 1792 in that video, I was kind of mentally comparing it to all of the other sourced Barton at the time that I was drinking, much of which is older, higher proof, and, you know, blended in kind of micro lots to give a more specific flavor profile, and, you know, generally a pretty good quality. I don't think that was a fair comparison, especially given the price points of those bottles versus this bottle, and I just felt like I needed to re-review it, especially because a couple of weeks ago, I actually found the remainder of that sample that I reviewed in that video. I poured it out, I tasted it, and I could not believe how good it was. I felt like a complete idiot. So I had to procure one of these bottles, let's just say. Thank you to my friend Josh for picking this up for me. I paid a little too much for it, but it's gonna be worth it because I wanted to re-review it in this video for all of you. I hope I say good things about it today. I mean, as you can see, I've had quite a few pours of this already. I've had a chance to get into it. Without further ado, I'm gonna stop talking so much. I'm gonna get to nosing this thing. Let's check out this 1792 12-year and see what we get. All right, so I absolutely love the nose on this whiskey. First off, I just want to kind of give some broad impressions of what's going on here and talk in kind of general terms. So the biggest thing that I'm getting is just an incredible amount of sweetness from this. Just below that, there's a good amount of spice, a really nice amount of both sweet and slightly bitter oak, and kind of on the back end, I'm also getting just a little bit of a floral characteristic as well. Now, you would kind of expect a lot of these things with 12 years in the barrel, you're gonna get a lot of sweetness. And with a pretty decent rye content, 18% rye in the mash bill, you would expect some good spicy notes, and also, you know, a little bit of that floral characteristic probably coming from that rye spice as well. And of course, again, 12 years in the barrel, you're also gonna get that pretty decent amount of oak. One thing I'm trying to do in some of my reviews and live streams, you know, as of late, is to kind of give some more like broad first impressions of whiskeys and not just go straight into super specific tasting notes. So overall, very sweet, good spice, good oak, a little bit of floral. Now let's dig in a little bit further and see what else is there on the nose. All right, so let's break down some of the sweet notes in here. I'm getting some vanilla frosting, vanilla icing, basically just a nice decadent vanilla note. Also good amounts of caramel as well. But I would say where this whiskey really like stands out is on the fruity side of things. Imagine any fruit, and that fruit is in this glass, okay? Dark cherry, raspberry, blackberry, blueberry. It's just like some sort of mixed berry preserves or compote. Now, in terms of some of the spicy components, I would say that this thing is coming off not so aromatic as I tend to think of other aged Barton whiskeys. So like the Sam Houstons, the Calumet Farms, sometimes you get cinnamon spice, you get what I kind of refer to and others talk about as like a Dr. Pepper type spice, which is kind of this more exotic, again, aromatic is the best way to kind of refer to that type of spice. Got a little bit of that bitterness to it. This is not that. This is very general. It's really just kind of like a white pepper oak spice. And I think I even said that in my first review of this. So it's kind of like a nondescript kind of a spice profile. All right, now in terms of the aged notes, maybe a little bit of leather going on here, but really what I'm getting is kind of a bittersweet oak. And what I mean by that is I'm getting some barrel char / charcoal notes. Sometimes that'll appear as espresso or dark chocolate. Not really getting that. It's more distinctly this kind of barrel char or charcoal thing going on. The oak on the other side of it, on like the sweet side, it's just kind of adding a sweet dimension to some of those fruit notes. So the oak really kind of integrates well with some of those darker fruits. And you know, that's a common thing we see in other Sazerac products on the other side of things, like Buffalo Trace stuff. They have a really nice sweet oak profile that blends in well with those dark fruits. Last but not least, there's a hint of a floral note in here. Again, I mentioned probably from the rye spice. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Four Roses, maybe like an OESK or an OESF type profile, just on the very, very back end of things. So what am I trying to say here on the nose? After, I don't know how long I've been talking about this on the nose. If it's really freaking long, I apologize. But it's complex. And not only that, not only does it have a lot of layers to it, but it's very balanced throughout that. And it's got a clear hierarchy of flavors, with the sweetness being kind of the primary driver on top. And I really like this thing. So let's go ahead and get this on the palate now. Cheers. I'm gonna tell you what, this is such a delicious and approachable and sippable bourbon. It is not even funny. I should have mentioned earlier that the proof of this is 96.6, which is 48.3% ABV. So we are under 100 proof on this whiskey. With that in mind, you know, you're not gonna expect like a huge flavor punch, not a huge like, you know, mouthfeel or viscosity from this. But I'm gonna tell you what, I think this thing hits with enough spice that it drinks a little bit over its proof. It develops into some beautiful sweet notes. The finish right now is just kind of medium, not super long, and you wouldn't expect it to be given the proof point. But this is some really good stuff. I'm gonna go in for a second sip. So let's talk about it now. Second sip of this whiskey, I was actually kind of hit up front with a little bit of a chocolate note, which is very cool and not something that I was getting before on the nose or the palate even. That kind of transitioned with some of that white pepper and that oak spice up front to a lot of vanilla sweetness and just a lot of dark fruit. I mean, on the palate, now this is coming across really in that plum, blackberry, dark cherry realm. And I know I talked about that on the nose. I talked about just kind of how varied and diverse the fruit notes were. It's really centering on dark fruits on the palate. And now as I'm getting into the finish, I'm actually left with a pretty good amount of spice hanging out. It's not really a Kentucky hug. It's just really hanging out in the back of the throat there with some white pepper. Yeah, I think I was smoking something in that last review that I did of this stuff, because I'm a huge fan of this. So I'm gonna do one more sip and then we can wrap this up. Yeah, this is just some beautiful stuff. It is a quintessential sipper. It's a really nice proof point for what it is. Works very well with the flavor profile. And I've gotta say, that third sip, you know, while I thought I was just gonna kind of wrap this up, the third sip actually continues to change and evolve. The bourbon becomes a little bit more stratified, where I'm actually getting some lighter notes now, like brighter fruits, apricot, green apple, these kinds of notes. And on the darker end of things, I'm actually getting like some smokiness. It's not just that barrel char that I talked about earlier, but it's actually getting a little bit smoky for me. And it's interesting. So as I sip this thing, each taste is kind of showing me some different notes. At this point, it's, again, like I said, starting to kind of stratify, light, dark. And on the finish now, I've got that smokiness. I've got some of that vanilla that I talked about, and actually a little grassiness, which I'm gonna knock it just a little bit. I'm not a big fan of grassiness in the finish of a bourbon, or really any whiskey for that matter. This has a little bit of that grassiness going on the very, very back end. But look, this is a really, really nice 12-year-old expression from 1792. If you have the opportunity to pick one of these up, I would say up to like 70 or 80 bucks, do it. I mean, if you look at the market, Knob Creek 12 is between like 60, 70, $80, depending on where you're at. It's a little higher proof than this, but it's kind of in that same category. And I feel like some people find this whiskey at really, really low costs, like $45, $50. That to me is an absolute steal. I paid $100 for this thing. I had to do that in order to get one, because I don't really see it here in Ohio. I'm not sad that I paid $100 for this. I wouldn't want to continue doing that, but if I could find it around 50, 60, 70, 80 bucks, I would probably, in a heartbeat, pick up 1, 2, or maybe even 3 of these things. So to me, it's a wonderful kind of daily sipper profile. Might not be realistic as a daily sipper, given the price, given the availability, but if you can find it, I say pick one of these up, especially if you're a fan of 1792 products, if you like aged bourbon, you like that kind of profile, and if you're looking for something that's not as heavy as maybe a Knob Creek 12, which does, for me, tend to get a little funky, peanut, lots of leather, lots of oak. This is gonna be a fresher, fruitier, maybe a little bit more vibrant profile that you might enjoy. If you like Brown-Forman products, you'd probably enjoy this. And if you like Buffalo Trace, I can't see how you could go wrong with the 1792 12 year. So that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope this video wasn't too freaking long. I'll see you next time. Cheers, and thanks for checking this out here on Drums and Drams.